Hello, and welcome to the Rhode Island Wave Spotlight Series, brought to you from the beautiful Coesit Inn. My name is Don Angelo, and I'm the host tonight, filling in for the vacationing Scott Nerney. Tonight we are honored to have with us Chief Darrell Waldron. He is the Executive Director of the Rhode Island Indian Council, and again, we're honored to have him here. So welcome, Chief.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Great. What I found in doing different interviews is most people initially like to hear about a person's background,
Yep.
where they grew up, the neighborhood, the family life, that type of thing. Were there issues, no issues? So the ball's in your court.
Yeah. So originally, I was born in Providence, of course, but we lived in Cranston over off of Niantic Avenue, which is a very large native population lived over there that were related, primarily Wampanoags, related to my mom and her family. And that was like the meadows. There was a lot of wild grapes and fruit trees and several families there. And then sometime in the early 60s, I guess, they decided to make it a industrial park for jewelry industry. Bunch of companies were purchased the property and was planning it for construction. So they relocated all the native population and just moved them out of there, which were relatives, and they all kind of went to different places. And then we moved to the west end of Providence, where I think I went to first grade in the West End, and then grew up there through the school system, and was very urbanized. It was a fairly well-mixed population of ethnic people there, African Americans, natives, whites, primarily Italian and Irish. Some of my best friends were Italian and Irish, whom I went to school with, that lived on the same street. It's normal. We were poor but happy. Penny candy stores were plentiful. We rode our bikes with the balloons, and pretty normal upbringing. We always knew that we were native. I guess my dad pushed it more than my mom. Sometimes it sounded like she just wanted us to just be like all the other kids. My dad would play his drum, and we would have stories about who we were. My friends there knew, my family was Native American, or Indian is what we used to say back then. Tribal identification was a little difficult. There was really not much of a recognition formality to tribes or genealogical research done to link the tribal groups and to reorganize them. That started in the late 60s, early 70s. And so I kind of grew up there doing my thing. I wrestled in high school, played Little League. I always wore a headband. It was sort of my trademark as a kid, one of those red old style handkerchiefs. My dad drove a truck for a living, and my mom worked off and on, but mainly raised us. We were 5 kids, mom and dad, both pot native. I don't know what the other pots were. I know it was a little Irish on my dad's side. And we grew up just normal kids, knowing who we were and having a good time in the West End. There was some mob activity there, so everybody was kind of tough. Everybody knew how to fight, fist fight. There was really not a lot of shootings or stabbings or anything like that. And we had, our block areas where we played and hung out, and other kids from other areas, and it's pretty much a normal childhood.
That's
good. Probably in the early 70s, the native identification for us and others started becoming a stronger factor, and some of the elders were meeting and talking more about, where they grew up and their heritage, and they started having home meetings, which they were at my house. It was a Monroe family, Larry Monroe, good guy who was cousins with my dad. He was really strong. A guy by the name of William Wilcox, who was one of the founders, first executive director of the Indian Council. They would come over and meet with my mom and dad. And so I was kind of there because I was getting a little mischief. So I was often in the house after dinner until I started hearing a lot more about it. So it's kind of what it was like, but it was pretty normal. Went to the playground, shot some basketball, swam at Buckland Park, over the Joslin Pool.
Well, that's good. That's good. You had somewhat of a normal childhood.
Yeah,
I
right.
did too growing up. I grew up mainly in an Italian-American neighborhood. But going to school, there was some rough times.
Oh,
When I
yeah.
was growing up, unfortunately called a lot of different names, which I didn't
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
but we got through it.
Yes.
And I was telling your beautiful wife over here earlier, we were talking, I said, what I try to do is when I go out there and see all different people, in my eyes, I see Americans. I
Right.
don't care what your heritage is, your ethnicity, your religion, you're American. And if more people would view people like that and try to do good for people,
Right.
instead of not doing good, the world would be such a better place.
It,
Really would.
it would. Racism's taught. It's not something we're born
I
with.
know.
And unfortunately, the innocent of it leaves very quickly when it starts
Yeah.
to cause
Oh,
pain.
absolutely.
People can have,
Absolutely.
gestures at home, but they turn into serious issues. As you know, growing up in those neighborhoods are very segregated. We knew where we could go, where we couldn't go, and it was the same for the other populations. They knew where they could go and where they couldn't. Kids kind of got stuck in the middle, the young ones,
Yeah.
because we were all playing
Of
together,
course.
but we learned as we grew older. Rhode Island was not that ethnically diverse. It was basically you were other or white or black or white.
Yep.
So there wasn't much. I remember the first Latino kid, Gustavo Linares, that I met was at Central High School in the
Yep.
ninth grade.
Yep.
First one I ever met, and it was his accent that drew me to him because I hadn't heard that before. And he didn't speak much English, but we could play basketball.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's a good thing. Growing up through school, I had a lot of different friends, Irish, black,
right.
the whole bit. And I had a conversation with my son not that long ago. We were talking about racism and whatnot. I said, Jeff, for some reason, when I was in junior high, we didn't see racism. We had sports. I had a couple of black friends, and they were on the basketball team. I was on the football team with them, and everything was great. We looked at each other like friends. And unfortunately, today it's not like that, which irritates me to no end.
No,
You
and
know,
it's starting to become into financial racism.
absolutely.
Now it's back in a different way. I did get caught in I think 3 race riots at Central High School. Unfortunate, I was not participating as much as I was trying to get away. Me and my sister went together there. My other siblings were older, and my dad told me, "You find your sister and come home," which we did. But I used to see the fighting.
Yeah,
It was violent
yeah,
and scary. We were young, ninth grade, 10th grade, but once you get past a certain area, you in your
yeah,
neighborhood,
yep,
and we had relationships with our white friends that we didn't talk to them too much in the hallways in the school, and it was vice versa because it
yeah,
was a racial time with Black Power was huge.
sure.
People were fighting for equality, and a lot of it I didn't understand at that age. But as
Yeah.
I grew older,
Oh, same with me.
you begin to understand the
Yeah,
evils of it. The
yeah,
little kids don't have that; they love each other.
exactly. It's too
Sad.
bad they can't just leave them alone, let
Yeah.
them grow up like that. But that's not the case. Um, so I understand that you have a tremendous recipe for meatballs.
I like to eat them. That's for sure.
Oh, I do too.
When they're made well, they are made well.
Oh,
It's
absolutely,
nothing.
absolutely.
Italian food is very good, which they serve at this restaurant. They do
Yes,
a
they
good
do.
job.
They do a good job. I said to my wife, I don't know what I'd do without Italian food in the world. My brother-in-law passed away 10 years ago. He used to say, what would we do without Italian bread? He used to talk about that all the time.
My dad loved Italian bread every night with his
Oh,
meal.
me too. So exactly, how did you get involved in what you do right now? What drew you there, or did someone say, hey, you're the guy, we need to put you in that position?
It's kind of an odd story. So, with the meetings happening at my house and
Hmm.
in the neighborhood, I knew about them. I was the youngest of the kids, and I had a brother in the middle who was a real tough guy. And my oldest brother, was big into cars. He comes from a generation, the
Yep,
muscle cars.
yep.
And so my brother in the middle was mischievous and taught me how to steal cars. So with him, I grabbed a 68 GTO, and he taught me to put the brake on and gun the gas pedal and spin the tires.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so I did that. I was about 13, and the brakes eventually went on the car.
Mm-hmm.
And my father was coming home from work, and I almost hit him in the intersection at the end of Waverly Street. At that point forward, my life changed, and was sent off to a horse farm where I worked, which I now own, and did hard labor basically every summer, and it was a passion of love, because I really enjoyed it. So now my family is fully engulfed in the Indian movement, and I started getting into it. And I got in trouble once more afterwards. I was probably 17, 18 years old. And the Indian Council was now established. The executive director, William Wilcox, who was Narragansett, and Gary Parker, who was Rappahannock out of Virginia, came and got me out of trouble. So I didn't get charges pressed or anything. And they kind of said to me, like the movie, someday we're going to get a favor from you for us getting you out of trouble. And sure enough, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years later, I was running a carpet flooring business. Pretty good business. We're doing well. We had bought a home and everything. And they came to my house and asked me to serve on the board of directors, in which I did. And then soon after that, they asked me to take over the Indian Council that had some issues with some housing we had built, and we couldn't get Indians in the home. So Title 6 and 8 of the HUD Code was preventing us from renting our housing projects just to Indians. And so they got in trouble with their funding, and I took on the Indian Center for 2 years. And went to Jack Reed, was very supportive. Senior Chafee also was. Went to D.C., drafted a bill to get that piece of property solvent so that Indians could occupy it. I was 23 maybe.
Wow.
22 years old, and Jack Reed, I gotta tell you, he was right on it. And he said, "You ready to go do this?" I said, "I'm ready to do this." So before we went down to testify in Congress, the funding source that was chasing the Indian Council for not having Indians in the housing that they paid $800,000 for, and Title 6 and 8 was preventing it. So Narragansett woman ran the program by the name of Lucille Dawson. Got a phone call from the commissioner and the assistant secretary of that particular organization, the Administration for Native Americans, and they dropped the charges, refunded us, and asked us to keep the organization going and deal with the housing issue long term, which we did.
That's good.
And that was it. We were off and going. Funding was about $70,000, and then that particular funding was $169,000 to solve the problem, which we did. Chafee Sr. was a lot of support.
Yep.
Jack Reed, they really were. And the Indian Council was off and running. Now we span 7 states and run
That's
about $8
great.
million budget.
That's great.
Yeah.
So currently, I mean, with all the work you do, are there issues that you think that the state of Rhode Island or the country could address for you that aren't being addressed?
Yeah, that's just a huge. So Rhode Island is somewhat classified as an anti-Indian state in the discussions amongst natives. Massachusetts is not too far from it. But Rhode Island, it's been particularly difficult. I don't receive any funding from the state of Rhode Island. All my funding is federal.
Yeah.
Although we live in Providence, Rhode Island, and I've been there 41 years as I've been there, 47 years in total. The issues are national. They're starting to get some momentum and recognition. I think that America was educated poorly and I guess fably with the John Wayne movies and the Clint Eastwood Western movies, that Indians were, these people that rode on horses and yelled and screamed and committed murder, and then the good Indians in the end always had to get the short end of the stick and that type of deal. And I think generally when non-Indian people think of Indians, I'm talking United States non-Indian people, they do put us back in time, 1800s and that regalia and doing that type of thing, or in a serene canoe. that type of deal. I don't know that they realize the historical trauma and poverty and all the horrible things that happen in Indian country.
Yeah.
They don't they don't think about that, and those are the struggles we have. Suicide is the number one cause of death. They're 10 times poorer than any poorest ethnic group in this country. Natives are. It's about 8 million of them. Their average income in the workforce programs that I ran are around $13 an hour. So 26,000. $15,000 salaries. They're just horrible. It's as bad as any third world country in some of those areas. Some do very well, but the majority of them are suffering from this occupation of this country.
See, that particular thing bothers me a lot because I look at it again when I see people. I think everybody's American, but when I see you, in my head, this was a Native American.
Right.
I'm not a. I mean, my grandparents came from Italy. You came from here,
Right.
and it's like, why the government can throw money at foreign countries who are not even our ally, and illegal aliens, but can't fund more for you and your people. It's mind-boggling. I think one time you told me, and I don't know if it got reestablished, that the state of Rhode Island had a committee or
Commission.
something. What was it?
Had an Indian commission in the
Yes,
70s.
yes.
Yeah.
And what happened with that?
It was discommissioned.
Just got decommissioned.
Yeah, there was controversial issues with sovereignty. So, Native people or tribes are political entities. They're governments, right, within the United
Yeah,
States.
yeah.
They're not part of the indigenous piece. They're governments, right?
Okay.
So they're tribal members recognized with their own government. And so some of the tribal members at the time felt that the commission chipped away at their sovereignty to self-govern
Yep.
because the commission
Yep.
was in between a state legislature and some tribal issues. I was young with it, but that's sort of what happened. I felt that the commission could have been something good. I think it did do some good work. My mom was one of the commissioners. I kind of view it as a mistake, but I think at the time it was not a mistake for those people that decided it needed to go.
Right.
I think had it stayed in place, things may have been a little bit more favorable in time.
Absolutely.
It takes time to change behavior,
Absolutely.
and I think it would have done that. It was one of the first in the country, I think.
Has there been any attempt to reestablish that?
No, there was a committee that was talking about it. The language that I read in the bill, I was opposed to because it again was looking as though it was chipping away at sovereignty, and you don't want to do that, right? But what you do want to do is have partnerships with the state
Right.
to benefit, your community and lack of whatever is in the community. So if
Right.
there's lack of education, lack of housing, lack of employment, it could bridge that. It should not involve itself with trying to control a tribal
Exactly.
government.
Exactly.
So
So since it was abolished, no one on the state side or on your side has attempted to reestablish something?
there's been a group, small group that did try to establish it, and I kind of mentioned I was opposed to the language that I read. We're more into recognition, so we have a bill that we put in last year for state recognition for the Seekonk Wampanoag tribe, which is the tribe I'm chief of. They are recognized and acknowledged in Massachusetts. We tried to do the same thing here in Rhode Island. It gained unanimous support within the representatives. We ran into Claire Richards, who's an attorney that was on behalf of the governor and the legislature. She was opposed to it. Had several issues why, which to me it really didn't matter. The bill said we didn't want any money, we didn't want any land, we didn't want any gaming. We just want to be recognized as a tribe here. We have our own property, and I've raised $55 million in my career for Indians. I don't have a problem raising funds for this tribe, but it just kept running into um, negativity within the speaker's office around issues between the governor and the speaker. A few Narragansetts were opposed towards it. There was a letter from the tribe that was opposed to supporting it, but wasn't blocking it. And then another letter came out talking about an act of 1978 that gave 180 days for any Indians to come forward with a land claim. It was primarily about land claims. We were not after a land claim. We were just after recognition. Um, and I have then since talked to the governor, which is not opposed to the bill. I have not been back to see Speaker Sakachi. Camille Vella-Wilkinson is a good friend of the Indian community and is advocating for the bill, introducing it. She also raised money for the monument, the cemetery up in Exeter, recognized Indians who fought in the war, all the tribal groups, and so it's a good lady.
That's nice.
And determined lady, and also Italian lady. We love her dearly, and she fights hard. She said one of her reasons for running was to try to get this bill across. But Indians have a hard time in the state of Rhode Island. They've had a hard time in this country. There is a lot of support. If there's a good time, it's probably now with awareness. It hasn't hit the East Coast too much. It's been a little sidetracked with some language around indigenous, which anybody from a place that was their homeland are indigenous visiting here. We're governments. It's really a different, and under being a government, we have federal law, and then we have the ability to make law within our own government, our own tribe. And so we're not really classified as indigenous, other than I think that the more accurate term may be aboriginal to the American continent. Although I'm not saying that some of those indigenous groups are not Indians or aboriginal from their homeland, but to me, a full-blooded Russian can be an indigenous living in the United States.
That's amazing.
I think there's a good amount of education that needs to still happen.
Absolutely. Now, has the federal, like either a senator other than Jack Reed, a representative, have they gotten involved at all with you, or?
Yeah, Sheldon Whitehouse has been support. Langevin was good. Reed. They support it, but it's today you're in a period where people smile and tell you a lot of things when you meet with them, and action always speaks louder than words. Although Jack has had action behind his stuff, but I'm still here, right? We're still fighting. We're still solving. Our data is horrible. The statistics have not improved all that much. It's not heart disease. It's not, emphysema. It's not cancer. It's suicide, one of the most preventable forms of death. And they destroy not only the immediate family, but they destroy communities. When people commit suicide, young people commit suicide, they take their own life. It's just absolutely devastating. And it's temporary. It's a permanent solution to a temporary type problem. But, the screams, I guess, need to be louder, or the ears need to be better.
Absolutely.
'Cause I'm not seeing that in the 40 years I've been doing it. I'm as passionate today as I was when I started. I've seen the horror of poverty.
We'll have to get Congressman Fung involved.
Good guy.
He's a good guy. I know him.
Yep.
I believe he's going to be elected. When he does, if you don't mind, I'll bring this subject up with him and see if he might want to meet with you.
Yeah, I met with him. A good guy. He's a man of the community. I used to run into him at Dee's Deli. Italian grinders. Up in Cranston, and he'd often be there.
Wow.
So he's a good, likable guy.
Likable.
We'll see with the politics,
Yeah. Politics are politics.
Yes.
A couple of things. There was, we talked earlier about the monument that disappeared.
Yes.
Canonicus Square.
Yep.
It blew my mind. I didn't know about it until I met with you that day and you told me about it. I was like, you gotta be kidding. I said, I'll find out. I'll see if I can find out where it is. I went to the mayor. I went to Parks and Recreation. I don't know how many people I talked to, and they're like, I don't know where it is. I said, but you guys took it down. You're telling me you don't know where it is?
Right.
No, we don't. So what I told the mayor, I said, well, Mayor, maybe nobody knows where it is. Maybe you need to replace it. Just do another one and replace it. But that never happened. And I even took it, I care about your people. I think I had told you this. I tried to get a funding from the federal government for a statue, American Indian statue. I went to Cicilline's office. He referred me to Washington, D.C., some people I talked to there. And I got the same story. Oh, no, there's no fun. Oh, no, we don't have any money. I don't know how many people I talked to, and they all told me the same thing. And I was so excited about it because I had a friend of mine who lives in California. He's an artist. And I gave him some ideas for the statue. He said, wow, that's great. He said, I'll be happy to design it. He said, but that's what I do. He said, I can't do it for nothing because it takes a while. I said, all right, well, just sit tight with the idea. I'll see what I can do with funding. You got nowhere. Got nowhere.
Yeah, thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
It's a lot of passion went into doing that. America wants to forget about Indians, man. It's,
No, they can't.
Local, state government does. Everybody does. They have a snapshot in time. Although they'll name, things after us and
Yeah.
hang artwork and that, but in reality, they want to forget. The whole statue phenomenon and all of that is an odd issue. I used to see that stone, that Canonicus rock at Central High School.
Yeah.
And I felt good about it because I knew
you did.
what that Bowen Avenue meant.
Right,
That was a
right.
signature of a chief whom was a great chief. And when it disappeared, it never went away in my mind. So here I am, and when you and I met, we talked about it. And it was a, gray granite.
Yeah.
And it had the arrow and it had the bow and then the arrow. So his signature was the bow. I think his brother's was the arrow on there. But it's gone. And like there was never a statue in Roger Williams Park. And the first time I went to Washington in my 20s to testify for Indian Village Housing, I went around D.C., awed at D.C., and there was no statues.
Yeah.
So Jack Reed sent me over to the Whispering Halls in the Capitol, and there was a statue there of Chief Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
But you only see it there,
Yeah.
right? And so it's a proud history. The United States military is designed after Indian warfare on the battlefield. Kwang Nag Paka is why they got a 5-star general, is the highest ranking officer in the military. He had 5 stars on his home. He was a wealthy man in the Indian world. He was a wealthy man in the white man's world. Just an incredible individual. Good friends with Lee Grant. He could ride a horse at a full run and put an arrow in a 4-inch target multiple times. And General Grant used him as an example of what the soldiers are up against when they fought the Indians on the plains. There's a lot about him. His mom was a non-Indian woman. She was a captive that married into the tribe. And there's just so many of those wonderful stories. At the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier was one of the last war chiefs to earn his rank in the World War, and left his coop stick there. He was so moved by the ceremony, he put his coop stick there, and they have it in a case. So we are embedded in the United States history.
Absolutely.
Other than the benefits owed to us and to who we were and who we still are. And it's unfortunate that the average individual doesn't think about the person that just cashed out their groceries as being a Native American.
Yeah.
But if they see him in regalia someplace, it instantly makes the relationship.
Yeah.
I think that's the education that needs
Yeah.
to happen. Boarding schools were a product of murdering the parents on the battlefield, and then after those battlefield murders out west happened, they went into villages and they found all these orphan children that had no parents because they just killed them all.
Right.
And they brought them into towns and provided, homes, and then converted them into Christianity. Some of those old films of that are hard to look at. So that was I was up on the Hill a couple months ago. That was a big issue that hit legislation. All women fighting for it, incidentally. It was disappointing not to see any men with them. They were old Indian women, and they were advocating. They were girls raised in those schools. held down and raped and everything. This is just a lot. The graves that they showed pictures of, hundreds of kids dead with no markings on their graves behind the boarding schools, which they brought with them to meet at the White House. And it's just, there's a lot of history.
There is.
And Columbus holiday is great. Columbus was a wonderful explorer. I know that there was an issue with his statue and his holiday. I mean, he opened up a passage. Verrazano probably opened it up first. They were great explorers. The relationship to today and them I think is misunderstood by the average person. I was listening to one of the people talk about Columbus Day wasn't about Columbus for him. It was about America. And, the Italians' contribution to America and all of that. And that it was freedom, right, here in America. And unfortunately, my first thought was, well, the natives were really free before you came. What you came here to acquire, you took from other people and then forgot about them, right? And they were reservationized. And so out of sight, out of mind. So those wordings go back and forth.
Right.
I have no spears towards Columbus as an individual. He's a man that got on a boat and went
Risked
out
his
into
life.
what looked like a floating bathtub, really. I've been on the replica.
Yep.
Does not seem very seaworthy,
No.
although it was. And I know he crashed on the rocks at some point, but the shape of it, they had to be brave or desperate, I guess.
But really, people have to be more aware of certain things.
Yes.
I've read things where during World War II, white Americans wanted to be in groups where there were Native Americans because they were very hard fighters.
Yes.
And when I think of World War II, I always think of the story of Ira Hayes.
Yes.
A lot of people don't even know it, that he was a Native American. Every time I see the Iwo Jima monument, he's the furthest to the left. He joined the military at 19, and he died 10 years later because of alcoholism.
And he died bad. He was always, it appeared, he was ashamed of his notoriety because he felt he didn't earn it.
Exactly. People would come they'd call him a hero, and he used to get mad. I am not a hero. Don't call me a hero. And it's
Navajos were warrior nations.
Yeah.
I attended some sweats with war heroes that were Native in Minnesota years ago, and it was quite impacting on my life, the feats that they could do. Very athletic, strong build, and the shame that they were carrying for their acts of war.
Absolutely.
And, Indians had societies where you had warrior clans. They were a group of people whom were warriors, and they were descendants of warriors and descendants of warriors. So for 200-300 years, that clan warred to protect the tribe, right? That was their role. You had the medicine people, the descendants of medicine people, who was to heal and do that. Then you had the council type. So they had that way of life that whatever they did well, and it was generationally. They didn't have a reason to track science. They didn't have a reason to go beyond where they were because the system they had worked. During the wars in any nation, that gets all interrupted. But when you're a warrior from 7 generations of being warrior, it's hardwired in your DNA.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you get on the battlefield, that is going to come to surface. Same thing with the healers and doctors and et cetera, et cetera. Germans were known for building wonderful motors, right? And it's just crazy what happened here and what you hear in America today and the people who they immortalize and foundations and statues and all that stuff. You don't find many natives.
Absolutely.
Although we know the war stories, Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, Red Cloud, Geronimo, but what about the women that supported them men? What about the children that were their offspring that never got to spend time, and ended up in boarding schools? Blood Quantum Collection was about tracking the hostile bloodline because they felt if you was a descendant of somebody like Sitting Bull. You were up to have a rising again because of that genetic warrior thing. You know, your descendantly, that was your role, was to protect your tribe.
It's amazing.
Sad, yeah.
It is. It is.
Af-
And I don't pretend to know a lot about your culture. I don't.
I don't know a
little,
lot about it either. I
little
learn
bits
something
and
all the
pieces.
time.
Yeah, you learn things, little bits and pieces, you know, about World War II. When I read about that, I was like, oh my God, you know, I didn't know this. Number of Indians that won the Medal of Honor. Those types of things you don't hear
volunteer
about.
for combat got medaled.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, this has been a very enjoyable and interesting discussion we've had. Very educational.
Yes.
And I really appreciate the fact that you came in.
I'm glad you called me. We had a good meeting of the minds and
Yep.
philosophies when we first met.
Yes.
Some tried to make it controversial, but I feel that our interview with the York Show and all of that, you know,
Well, I'm glad
gave credence to who we are.
we were on the same page. In case Dan York is watching, he didn't get to us.
No.
Because we didn't want him to.
No. And I don't know what's going to end up over there at that site where it was. I think the representative there doesn't want a statue. He was thinking of something else because he think if any kind of statue, it may get defaced. I don't know exactly what is going to happen. For us, we're hoping to get a Native American image or monument or something to commemorate natives.
Commemorate.
Yeah,
there we go.
Commemorate.
Thanks, Dina.
Yes, is what we're hoping for, you know, and I think that issues in history need to be put into their place, right? You know,
Exactly.
Columbus was a traveler. What happened afterwards was the nature of people.
Right.
You know.
Well, thank you very much again.
Yes, thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Awesome.
Always
is.
best of luck.
Yes. Thank you.